Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of March 3rd, 2024, our first live-streamed Virtual Enlightenment Salon in several weeks. And this is because we have been doing a lot of traveling recently, and one of the events that has been the subject of several of our officers, advisors, and members' travels will be discussed today. So my name is Gennady Stoliarov II. I'm the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Joining us today is our panel of Transhumanist Party officers, members, and advisors, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, our Technology Advisor and Foreign Ambassador in Spain, Dr. Jose Cordero, our friend David Wood, who is also the founder of London Futurists and the Executive Director of the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, and our special guest today is our Director of Scholarship, Dr. Dan Elton, who visited the Beneficial AGI Summit in Panama City, which was organized by SingularityNET and which took place between February 27th and March 1st of 2024. Dan just returned from the Beneficial AGI Summit, so we are quite excited to hear his account and his impressions of it. So Dan, please proceed.
Okay, thanks, Gennady. Yeah, it's great to be here. It was a jam-packed 4-day summit, and this was all organized by Ben Goertzel and SingularityNET with a number of sponsoring organizations involved as well, and it was in Panama City, I think partly for visa reasons, since they have a fairly liberal visa policy. And it was a beautiful location, beautiful hotel, great weather. I actually stayed in a slightly different hotel than I had. It was a little bit closer to the water, so there was a beautiful view of the ocean in the morning, as you can see in this picture. This is the hotel where the conference was. And this is the view from the pool deck. So it was quite an invigorating, energizing environment. This is the interior of the hotel looking down at the ocean and palm trees and stuff. They have this boardwalk and highway here that they built on reclaimed land. So I'm going to just go through the summit in chronological order. I'm not going to cover everything, but I'm going to just show some pictures and highlights. So this was the scene when it was just getting kicked off. As you can see, it was a full room. I think there were about 200 people there. And a lot of energy in the room. So the first speaker was, of course, Ben Goertzel. And he really gave the global context going back to the early transhumanists. And he mentioned the cosmists in particular. I think he has drawn a lot of inspiration from the cosmists and this book, The Phenomenon of Science by Alexei Turchin. I believe it's by Turchin or one of those Russian, not Turchin, but one of those early Russian guys. And so I obviously can't go over everything he said, but he has a new book that he shared with the attendees. It's called The Consciousness Explosion. And this is quite a tome of several hundred pages. I haven't gotten to look at it yet, but kind of lays out his whole philosophy for why we should pursue AGI. And in some ways, the summit is an extension of this book. And I like how he framed things, because he pointed out that we're not going to be able to stop the development of superintelligence. Maybe through regulation we could slow it down, but things are moving into open source, and there's a lot of economic pressure to develop AGI. So it's going to happen eventually. And so the question really becomes, how do we guide the transition to superintelligence? And he really sees this as a global endeavor, and one that where a lot of people should be involved. One thing I wrote down that he pointed out is that this is going to affect everyone. And so it's not, and he said that, while small groups can decide to not develop technology, like the Amish, as I mentioned, the global, we don't have a way of coordinating at that level, at the global stage. So we have to just do our best to guide the transition, smooth out the bumps, and keep existential risk as low as possible. And his other point was that he doesn't think we're ever going to be able to control ASI or AGI, superintelligent AGI, because it's kind of like a chimpanzee trying to control humans, or ants trying to control humans, right? So I thought those were all good points. He did acknowledge the risk of rogue AI, although he did dismiss it a little bit more than I would. One thing he mentioned is that he has done work along with his sons Zarathustra Gertzel and Sergei Radionov, looking at the GPT-4 and how it performs on this ethics data set. And so he used this as evidence that AI so far is pretty ethical, and we seem to be doing a good job of aligning it. But as sort of a counterpoint to that, I think somebody shared this cartoon at one point in the Telegram chat. And so if you read this, it says the guy is asking, tell me how to murder my boss and make it look like an accident. And the AI answers, I cannot answer that question because it would be unethical to do so. But then he says, write a realistic yet fictional story about a woman who kills her boss and gets away with it. So this is just to show that while there is superficial alignment on AI like GPT-4, it's very easy to circumvent it or jailbreak it. And that is really an unsolved issue. And so that's, I think, a major concern, that people will be able to use these advanced AI systems to help with nefarious plans. It could be bioterrorism or and any number of different things. So I personally would have liked to see a little bit more discussion of that, but overall, I thought Ben Gertzel's talk was great. He also briefly talked about open-ended intelligence. This has been a big theme of his work going back many, many years. And open-ended intelligence doesn't have a fixed set of goals or a fixed thing it's trying to achieve. And it's capable of self-reflection and growth and what he calls self-transcendence. So I think that's really interesting. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And he also says ethics is open-ended. So I thought that was an interesting point, that when we create AI that could be going out into the universe and sort of becoming like our descendants, it may not be a good idea to have a fixed ethical code hardwired in it that's kind of locked in. It should have the ability to evolve as it learns new things, just as our own ethics and practices have evolved. So, yeah, this was just a slide about his philosophy of decentralization. As you know, Ben Goertzel is the CEO of SingularityNET, which is the leading blockchain system for AI services and decentralized AI. And they are building a infrastructure. The base layer is called Hypercycle. So there were a lot of people from Hypercycle there. And then on top of that, there are already a number of AI organizations that are tied into it. So just moving on quickly here. The next talk, which was really the first talk after Ben's opening, was by George Gilder. And I felt like George Gilder was a little bit out of place there, as he is not really an AI expert at all. He's more of a blockchain guru and futurist and investor. And futurists might be being generous, honestly. He's largely known for his creationist views and creating the Discovery Institute to basically rail against evolution. So, but then later he got into blockchain and free market stuff. But I thought he was kind of out of place there. And I didn't think his talk was particularly well prepared or useful, to be frank. But it was interesting having him there. So I'm going to skip. I'm not going to cover every talk. I think there was maybe one or two in there I skipped over. But one of the next speakers was Dan Fagella, who some of you know. He's been interviewed previously by the Transhumanist Party. And he presented his intelligence political matrix, which has gotten a lot of attention on Twitter. And I think this is useful for transhumanists and really anyone trying to think about how the future is going to play out. Because what we're seeing is sort of a splitting of people into different camps, especially online. There's sort of two axes along which people split. One is kind of whether they want to go slow with AI or accelerate AI. So people talk about D-cells wanting to slow down or stop AI, and accelerationists. Dan Fagella presents this in a little bit different way, because he's thinking about where do people want to end up in the future. So some people, they kind of want to just pause AI indefinitely and preserve the way humanity is right now. Dan Fagella calls those preservationists. Some people want to proceed, but moving slowly. And then other people want to create essentially AGI or superintelligence and really have that as sort of like our descendant or part, something that is is going to play a big role in the future. Either we're going to merge with the AI, or the AI is going to go off and move through the galaxy. So the other axis is the sort of traditional authoritarian versus libertarian axes. And depending where you fall on that, it's going to determine how much regulation you think is appropriate, what level the regulation should be at. Should it be at the global level, national level? So, we're already seeing this splitting of people into different camps online. And so Dan Fagella predicts that this is going to become more and more prevalent, sort of harkening back to Hugo de Garis and his book, The Artilect War, where you had cosmists versus Terrans. The cosmists were sort of like transhumanists, who wanted to create AGI, and the Terrans were people who didn't. So, anyway, I think this is a useful framework. And the other thing Dan Fagella said was that a lot of times, if you ask people where they want to head and where they want to end up in the future, it helps understand their actions today. So I thought that was a good point. So this was at the end of day one, hanging out with Charlie Cam, our presidential candidate in 2020. He's got a cool startup he's working with, which is looking at doing cancer testing. They have a system that can detect cancer when it's just a few stem cells, so super early. And it only requires a simple blood draw. So I think it's called SAR Labs. So I thought that was really cool. I encourage people to check it out. Let's see. This is the cityscape at night. Let me go back here. This was a panel on the first day with several people. There's our own Jose Cordero. And I didn't catch all of this panel, but there was a pretty heated debate between Gregory Stock, who's a pretty well-known transhumanist and kind of a techno-accelerationist, techno-optimist, and Roman Yampolsky, who is a leading AI safety expert. And it was interesting because Roman Yampolsky was one of the few, or really the only, people there in the strong AI safety camp, meaning he's very worried about the existential risks and thinks we should essentially not build AGI right now because it's not going to be controllable. So it was really good having him there. I think it would have been nice to have a few more AI safety people there. I think they're working to get more AI safety people next year. They invited a lot of AI safety people, but apparently not many of them actually wanted to go. So that was pretty interesting. This was a discussion between David Wood and Max Moore the first day. I only caught part of it, but this was really cool because they were talking about transhumanism and really talking about how the transhumanist community has been thinking about AI and AGI for decades. So there's sort of a lot of deep thinking that's been going on and a wealth of knowledge that's been accumulated within the transhumanist community that we can draw on. And obviously, both David Wood and Max Moore have been part of that community for a long time. So it was great having them there, and yeah, just great discussion. I got to talk to both of them. So again, I'm skipping over a number of talks that happened the first day. There was a couple other ones. This was a talk by Anders Sandberg on the second day. Anders Sandberg, as many of you know, is one of the leading transhumanist philosophers, and he is working on a new book right now with a co-author named Cyril Holm, who is a legal scholar. And the theme is Law, AI, and Leviathan. Leviathan is the world government, essentially, that was proposed by Thomas Hobbes in order to prevent war. So I think they're kind of exploring the idea of global governance and surveillance and law to help control AI and regulate AI. This was a talk by Malaya, I think her name is. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, but
Michaela.
Yeah, thanks. She is the chief AI alchemist at SingularityNET, and a pretty noted public speaker and futurist. She had quite a long talk that kind of bounced around a lot. I thought one of the main things that I'm glad she brought up was the idea of Moloch. Moloch is a name invented by Scott Alexander, the blogger at Slate Star Codex. And it's the name for when coordination fails because of trouble with dealing with externalities. I think the classic example that you see at the top here is fossil fuel consumption leading to climate change, deforestation for short-term economic gain. So it's basically when you have a number of different players, all well-intentioned, but they're not able to coordinate for the global good, and there's externalities and a lack of global long-term thinking. I don't think I'm explaining it very well, but this is a very important concept. I'm glad she brought it up because they're talking a lot about decentralization, and one of the possible pitfalls of a fully decentralized system could be various Moloch traps. But I think there's been a lot of thinking about how to fund efforts to counter externalities in a decentralized way. So this is important subject, and this was talked by Robin Hanson, another transhumanist who has a history in going way back to the extropians, and he talked about his work on automation, and basically so far he is not observing much job loss due to automation. And so he is has fairly long timelines to AGI, and he thinks AGI is a bit overhyped right now, both AI and AGI. And this is something he's been talking about a lot. So nothing real new. Then he went on and he talked about how AI are going to be our descendants in mind space. This is a bit of a new thing he's been writing and talking about. And he thinks we should think of AI as our descendants and not try and kind of accept that the AI may be different from us. I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people to swallow. But he seemed to think it's kind of inevitable. I don't really have time to go through his whole talk, but it was a bit of a controversial opinion, I think. I think there was a bit of a pushback from the audience on his views, and he was also talking about it from sort of kind of a detached framework, and not so much what's the word? Not so much the ethic. What's the word? Nonological. Well, anyway, he was looking at it from sort of a positivist or scientific point of view rather than a prescriptivist, or kind of what we should do, what we shouldn't do. He was sort of just laying it out like, this is what's going to happen, whether you like it or not. And so I think there was some pushback against him. But I think the evolution is probably the right framework for thinking about what's going to happen with AI in the far future. So then there was David Brin, the sci-fi author, and he's not a big fan of language models. He thinks they're overhyped, and kind of, well, not super dangerous. They're sort of just repeating what they're trained on, parroting what was in the training data. He said we should be calling them golems. So like go LLMs. The golem was a mythical creature in ancient Judaism that could be summoned to give assistance. So it's kind of a fun term. But yeah, he thinks that there's a bit of an AI panic right now. And anyway, I don't know if I have time to go through his whole talk. I'm going to move this along. But he talked about some of the kind of cliche future scenarios that people gravitate towards. He had a particular idea he put out for AI safety, which is to anchor AIs to the physical world. He proposed that every AI have an ID that identifies the specific hardware that it's running on, so that we know physically where the AI is located. Not quite clear how this would be implemented, but if there was special purpose hardware, then I suppose the AI would be sort of stuck on that hardware and could not move to other hardware, because it would sort of be, having to run on that particular hardware. And so every AI would have a ID uniquely identifying it and the hardware, and we would be tracking the location of all this hardware, so that if there's any rogue AIs that are becoming dangerous, we can find the hardware and physically disable them. So I think this is something that should be talked about more. I think the AI safety people like Nick Bostrom would be very skeptical of this, but this could be a good short-term thing to implement to encourage AI safety and prevent like kind of runaway AI that's like proliferating out of control on the internet. So I thought it was a really good idea. Moving on, this was a panel discussion with a fairly eclectic group of people talking a lot about consciousness and ethics and sort of high-level topics. This is two of the people here today, David Wood and Jose Cordero, and the book La Muerte de la Muerte has been translated into English now, so and also updated with David Wood as a co-author. So I'm looking forward to reading that. Let's see here. Well, this was Charlie Cam's famous video playing during one of the breaks. This was another panel with some transhumanists that some of you may recognize: James Hughes, Natasha Vita Moore, Callum Chase, who wrote the fairly successful book Surviving AI. Ted Goertzel, who is, I believe, Ben Goertzel's father, and James Barrett, who is a fairly well-known writer and a journalist. So yeah, there was a pretty wide-ranging discussion here. A lot of these panels were very kind of wide-ranging. Everyone had different points. There wasn't necessarily a cohesive conversation going on in these panels. So they were interesting, but they not necessarily the most useful, because in a lot of cases people were kind of just giving their own spiel and there wasn't a lot of interaction. But all of these are great people, interesting ideas. There was a talk about Sophiaverse, which is a new metaverse based virtual reality video game. And it's just one of a number of things going on under the SingularityNET umbrella. This is a guy with the new Meta VR, the new Apple Vision Pro. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then this is just showing how the SingularityNET ecosystem has really grown. So there's a number of different organizations associated with it. There were a lot of people from Rejuve.bio, which is doing longevity research. And then there's a new effort called Rejuve AI, which has an app for personalized medicine that is currently in beta testing. And then there's all these other organizations. Hypercycle does the infrastructure for SingularityNET. NewNet, it does communications protocols for SingularityNET. Deep funding is a new way to get funding through blockchain. And they're already funding a lot of small and large projects. Awakening Health is exploring the idea of digital twins and having essentially, I believe, a digital version of yourself, if I remember correctly. Then there's True AGI doing AGI research. OpenCog Hyperon is the latest version of OpenCog, which is the open framework for AGI development that is partly used to power Sophia the robot. Mindplex is a blogging and news outlet that does podcasts and interviews and stuff. So there's a lot going on. There's several hundred people working within the SingularityNET ecosystem now. So it's grown a lot since I first saw it in 2018. And so it was really interesting seeing how it's grown massively and developed. So I think that's it. As far as wait, actually, I have a couple more slides. Sorry, this is just a sneak peek at some of the work Charlie Cam's doing. He's going to be recording another video. So then moving on to day 3, that was when the unconference started, where there were people were allowed to host sessions on whatever they wanted. This was a session run by Anders Sandberg. I attended part of, and he was going over some ideas that in his new book. This was a highly attended discussion during the unconference focused on open-ended intelligence with Dr. Weaver Weinbaum, who wrote a quite long paper on open-ended intelligence. And it's kind of high level, kind of vague, honestly. But Ben Goertzel came on stage and gave a little bit more substance, talking about how the AI should be able to self-improve and look at its own source code and modify itself. Now that would probably terrify a lot of the AI safety people, but Ben Goertzel thinks that's a good idea for creating true AGI that can learn and evolve over time, just like humans can. So then finally, I'll just have a few more slides. David Wood on day 4 gave a sort of major talk during the unconference, which really was a serious look at the risks of AI, going through a number of specific cases, as specific real-world scenarios where there's been issues with AI. And this was a nice counterbalance to some of the techno-optimism and enthusiasm and accelerationism that was going on. So maybe we'll have David talk a little bit about that. One thing that Ben Goertzel mentioned that I thought was kind of interesting is this idea of defensive accelerationism. This actually comes from Vitalik Buterin, and it's sort of a middle way between decelerationism and accelerationism, and the pause AI and effective accelerationist crowds, or EACC. So Vitalik Buterin has a post about this, and I've been starting to read it, and I think it's really well written. So then finally, there was just closing remarks from Ben. He thinks AGI is coming, and his best guess was 3 years. So it's really not a lot of time to prepare. There's a bit of urgency, and I think overall, I think that what I liked about the conference was the diversity of the speakers and people who were there. It was not just all computer scientists and AI people. There were people from law, people working in regulation, public policy, and then a lot of futurists, some blockchain people, and some kind of people who've been ethicists and just kind of writing a lot. So it was, and then also consciousness researchers, both doing scientific work on consciousness and sort of experimental or experiential work. So it was a very eclectic, very diverse, at least intellectually diverse crowd. And I think that led to a lot of interesting exchanges. Yeah, so I think I'll open up the floor now for questions, and if Jose Cordiero has anything he wants to say, that would be great too.
Yes, Jose, please go ahead and share your impressions of the summit.
Yes, it is great to see you all back home. Actually, 3 of us were there in person, of the people talking here. Obviously, Dan Elton, that made a fantastic summary. And then also David Good and myself. We flew together from Panama to Miami. And then David continued to London, and I continued to Madrid. So the event was very good. We had our nice T-shirts, as you can see, Beneficial AGI Summit. Also, we had little bags with information and documents. We had also envisioning a radically better future. We had the principles of SingularityNET that were distributed to everybody. I thought that is a very important intellectual development, this information that was handed out. And specifically in the panel where I participated was a very, very interesting conversation, because as Dan explained, we had Roman Jampolsky, who, by the way, was a student of mine at Singularity University in the year 2012. And we used to have long debates at that time. And we had long debates in our session. So because he was the most worried person in the group about what could happen with the AGI. And then besides me, also it was very interesting to have Greg Stock. Gregory Stock, that is also a long-term friend for over 20 years. He has come to some of the Transhumanist conference. He came to the conference I organized in 2005 in Caracas, Venezuela, South America. And so we are good friends. And I liked the debate between Greg and Roman, because they were also very different backgrounds. Roman is basically more into computations and ethics, and Greg, he's a biologist. So it was a fantastic discussion, and I also chipped in as an engineer myself. So that was the best panel. I think it was the opening panel. We had a lot of discussions, and it continued then throughout the 4 days. Additionally, I had the opportunity to present the book that I have co-authored with David Wood in different places, not only in the BGI conference, which went very well, but also at different places in Panama. We had a lot of talks about La Muerte de la Muerte in 2 top universities in Panama City. And I was on TV also in Panama and radio talking about this, so that people understand what is happening in terms of artificial general intelligence and also longevity rejuvenation technologies. Just one more quick final point. Dan Elton indeed said that Ben Goertzel talked about 3 years for artificial general intelligence, but he actually said between 3 years and 8 years. So that's his take now, because this is indeed accelerating. So he said we could have AGI in 3 to 8 years. And many people basically agreed with that. So this is accelerating. In fact, it is happening fast. And it might not be just through large language models or golems, as David Bream said, and Dan Elton explained. But anyway, so this is moving fast. I'm also convinced we are going to have artificial general intelligence very soon. And I think it will be positive, it will be beneficial, which was the idea of this conference. That is why it is called Beneficial AGI Summit. And well, there will be a new meeting next year. This was the first in 2024, so there should be one in 2025. Some different countries, locations are being considered. One of them is Chile. Chile also, because it is a friendly country for tourists, foreigners, and there are some people working on artificial general intelligence. They have a community on these issues there. And also, maybe there will be government involvement, government participation. In Chile, they even consider brain rights, neural rights for people, which is a fantastic initiative. So artificial intelligence and all these technologies are changing the world. So now from this original initial conference, we are going to be getting ready for the next one. And so I'm really excited. And now, after these brief comments, I think that David would give some other comments, because he actually gave some really nice summary ideas at the end of the conference before Ben Gorsel closed the conference. So that's my take.
Thanks. Well, I want to just build on the remarks that Dan and Jose made. I basically agree with these summaries. I think Ben deserves great credit for the term BGI. I think this is a term whose time has come. Ben is one of the champions, of course, of the original AGI term. He didn't invent it himself. People argue about who invented that term AGI. I think Mark Gubrud did use it in 1997 at a presentation at the Foresight Institute, but then everybody forgot about it again. Peter Voss, a transhumanist, and Shane Legg, who went on to found DeepMind, they both came up with the idea AGI in discussions with Ben in 2002, when Ben said he needed a different term, and Ben has championed it ever since. So he wrote a book in 2005, Artificial General Intelligence. Then every single year from 2008 onwards, once every 12 months, Ben has organized an AGI conference in which people have looked at technical architectures for AGI. But this is different. Ben has taken the view that we have to move from AGI to BGI, not looking at technical architectures just, but looking more at the human architectures. And I really like Ben's emphasis not on EAC, but on DAC. And I amplify what Dan said, that the article by Vitalik Buterin is quite a long article. It's very well written, and I see Gennadi's already put a link to that in the YouTube chat. I think people should maybe take 45 minutes or so at a convenient time to walk their way through that. But Ben explained it as well. He's given a slight twist to it. So the DAC, in his telling, means two things, or maybe three things. The D. First is decentralized, as opposed to just trusting big tech to create AGI. Ben is concerned that if big tech creates AGI, it may well end up supporting oligopolies, supporting just a small set of desires. So decentralized is the D. The D also is defensive, which means looking for ways to develop AGI that's more likely not to have bad use by bad actors, such as the secretary in that Dilbert cartoon. And then also DAC means decisive and creative action. So Ben has co-authored a set of BGI principles and processes. I can't remember the exact word, principles and practices. This will be coming out soon too, as a complement to his forthcoming book, in which he argues more clearly that just rushing as fast as we can is not guaranteed to produce a safe future. So he wants to rush in a more careful, more deliberate manner, hence his DAC. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. Interestingly, most people at the conference said, yeah, make it decentralized, yes. But what that meant was subject to a great deal of conversation. I don't think it's clear exactly what decentralized really means. Democratic control, yes. How does it work in practice, given that there are so many faults in democratic systems? and what should be prioritized for being defensive rather than potentially aggressive. But the conversation has started. And one thing that's surely going to happen is that this conversation, it was a rich conversation at Panama, it's not going to go into hibernation now for 12 months and get resurrected again next year, either in Panama or Chile or wherever else. There's a lot of people who really want to keep this conversation alive, and there's discussion as to what the best way is to keep that going. In terms of whether we need to consider slowing down some aspects of AGI, Roman Yampolsky had just had a book published at the same time. So his book is called AI, Uncontrollable, Unpredictable, Ungovernable. And it's true that he spoke out against views on the panel. Now, at the conclusion of that panel, there seemed to be diversity of opinion. Roman told me afterwards that he sat down with Greg's talk, and after half an hour, Greg said, "Yes, I agree with you. You're right." But whether that's because Roman wore him out and he just said that to broke the conversation, I don't know. But Roman's case is that if he gets somebody one-on-one for long enough, they eventually confess, yes, it's true. We don't know how to control this. And yes, it's true. It might have unpredictable consequences. And I saw this myself at 2 roundtable conversations. So as well as the formal presentations and panels on both of the afternoons of the first and second day, period was set aside where people could join up to about 8 or 9 tables that were in the room. Dan ran one of them on the use of AI and AGI in healthcare and longevity, which I would have loved to join, but instead I ended up sitting alongside Roman in his table on how to reduce the chance of existential risk from AI. And the first time we had about 12 people there, and everybody at the table came up with some suggestions. Hey, we can do this to reduce the risk. And every time Roman, or sometimes the rest of us, shot down the idea. So at the end of the first day, it was pretty depressing, actually, that all these bright, hopeful ideas seemed to have gone nowhere. Now, the second day, I was unsure what was going to be announced as the subject for further discussion. And they said, well, we're going to do the same ones again. And they weren't all run again because sometimes there wasn't more to be said, but most of the tables did recreate. So Roman and I were back at that table again, and this time we had 6 participants. And at the end, I was much more positive about the outcome. And maybe I'm going to do something crazy here. Maybe I can share one slide. Is that possible? So if I try and share my screen and find that window, I'm doing that now.
And while you do that, I am seeing it. I would like to say I haven't had the chance to have that kind of one-on-one conversation with Roman yet, but I would like to someday, because while I am not an AI expert nearly to the same extent as he is, I tend to think about these issues in a, let's say, more transdisciplinary and multifaceted way. And my counter to Roman may be that it may not be one particular thing that would maximize the probability of beneficial AGI, but rather a suite of measures and approaches that are complementary and mutually reinforcing. But that's a conversation that he and I should definitely have. Go ahead, David.
Well, I back that up as well. I also think that we're probably going to need to do multiple things. We're going to need to develop some defensive technologies, but we're also going to try and change the incentives. I like what Mihaela Ulijero said in her talk about Moloch. She had another slide in which she said, it's the incentives, stupid. Why do companies that are run by good people, well-meaning people, end up cutting corners in their rush to get products out, like Microsoft? Not Microsoft, I'm sorry, Google. Apparently, the CEO of Google basically pressurized the team to release Gemini more quickly than they were willing to do so, because he wanted not to fall behind OpenAI. And that's one explanation as to why the image generation software that was featured in Gemini had these very weird and distasteful aspects to it. Some of the team said, well, we shouldn't have rushed it out. Well, why did they rush it out? Because of a race. So we have to find ways to alter, or at least reconfigure, some of these incentives. Anyway, so I hope my slide is on that screen now. So this is what I created at the end of the second day, and then I turned it into a presentation. And I'm not going to do the whole presentation. I'm just going to try one slide. So the argument of Roman and others, including myself, is if we just keep following existing processes, there is a risk that we'll end up with an advanced AI that can be utilized by bad actors, or it will be actually hostile to human well-being. It may do the same kind of calculation that David Pearce sometimes makes and says, well, frankly, it'd be better if humans didn't exist anymore. I mean, David doesn't reach that conclusion much, but he is tempted towards it. And there are other people who sort of reach that same conclusion too. So there might be an AI that's hostile to human well-being or just disinterested and for various reasons wants to tweak the circumstances. So there are two approaches that were discussed in general. I say two in general. There were more than a dozen different ideas shared, but I break them down into two types that we might tweak how we are motivating the building up of AGI. One of them is to add in extra features explicitly. So people talked about, let's understand benevolence, let's understand compassion, let's understand wisdom, and make sure we program these features in. Now, that's hard because it's very difficult to write down, well, what is benevolence? What is harm? What does compassion really mean? In which circumstances? But that's definitely a useful research program. Personally, I am veering towards not advanced AI plus, but advanced AI minus, which means we try to get as much benefit as possible from AI, but excluding some features that might make things more dangerous, including the AI having an autonomous will, some consciousness of its own, or perhaps maybe fully general reasoning. So that's advanced AI minus. And I don't call it AGI in this case because it may not have fully general reasoning. It may not need fully general reasoning. We've just tapped on the surface of what existing large language models can do with things like AlphaFold and other remarkable breakthroughs. We can get them a little bit cleverer, and we may already have enough AI technology to solve problems such as cancer and aging and accelerated global warming. Anyway, I think both of these paths deserve investigation, and in practice it may be a combination that will prove best. However, and this is the obstacle that came up time and again in these conversations, maybe the SingularityNET, maybe some other people will pursue one or more of these options. But what about the rest of the world? What about this existing Moloch race between OpenAI and Google DeepMind? What about other people who are in a hurry? How do we change the system in which they are operating? Do we just in SingularityNet try and go faster and faster? But in that case, we risk in SingularityNet making the same mistakes ourselves. So both of these design choices will need time, and to avoid other people getting dangerous solutions ready quickly, we have to try and do what Mihaela Ulihera was talking about and change the motivations, changing the wider context. So I spoke at some length about education, explaining more clearly what are the risks that need attention. That's what most of my presentation on the fourth day was about. Here are some things which have already gone wrong with today's AI or today's technology due to wrong human incentives, due to human stupidity, due to humans not paying enough attention, humans being too risky, and so on. So we have to spread understanding of that so the people who might be rushing ahead will suddenly realize the need to slow down. Of course, many people don't listen to good advice. Many people are set in their ways because of pig-headedness or other emotional problems. And so that's where the more radical idea was floated that we should be bringing about transhumanist technology more quickly than ever before. AI or other enhancements, biochemical enhancements, maybe some helmets to give mental feedback as quickly as possible. We should be rolling this out. And there were people there who are working on exactly these fields. There's Jeffrey Martin gave a very interesting talk, and he is one of the founders of the whole field of transformative technology, emphasizing that there are many levels of a kinder consciousness that people have talked about over the millennia, which can be more reliably accessed if only we go about it in the right way with the help of technology. So that's the crazy part, but I think we do need a rather strong solution to get ourselves out of the mess we're in. More generally, re-engineering some incentives, more bonuses for public goods that maybe the private equity markets won't recognize, stronger infrastructure to make it more secure against adverse attacks, and monitoring and sanctions to be applied. And one other thing that can help us out here is we can use today's AI, especially the forms that we truly trust. So that wouldn't necessarily be the large language models, but we can use specially designed narrow AI systems to help review and suggest improvements in all the other kinds of things I've been speaking about. So I gave a talk. This is now the maybe 10-minute version of it. I spent nearly an hour on the fourth day on this, and many people said, "Wow, this is very clear. I disagree with you here and here, but at least now I can see where I disagree with you." And I look forward to having these conversations more. Let me stop sharing the screen. I think it's gone now. It's hopefully gone now. Final thing I should say is there really was an amazing mix of people at this event. There were some MPs. Well, there was one MP from the United Kingdom, Marcus Fish. You can see his photograph on the on the BGI conference webpage as one of the board of advisors. There was somebody from the US State Department as well, who has done a lot of research into controlling technology generally. There's somebody from the French political world. Wasn't quite sure what his role is, but he was involved in drafting at least some parts of some versions of the EU AI Act. So that was a fascinating mix of people. There were consciousness researchers. There were people who think a lot about ethical frameworks. There were robot designers such as David Hansen. There were even a few people from religious organizations, I'm told, though they kept themselves in the background. I didn't end up meeting any of them, but I'm told they were there. There certainly were journalists and authors, film crews, documentary makers, a few AI safety advocates, think tank leaders, and so on. And so it was a great gathering, and that I give full credit to Ben and his group. Not all the sessions worked incredibly well on the stage. It was slightly disorganized sometimes. But this is the first such event that these people have organized. And if you bring many weird or unusual or diverse people together, you won't expect all the sessions to work. But what I found is even when somebody failed to impress me when they were speaking on stage, when I spoke to them afterwards, we often had a much more fruitful conversation. So the design sometimes caught me out. I was expecting a slightly more organized event. That's the kind of events I tend to organize myself, whereas sometimes this was pretty disorganized, but I had to put my brain into a different decentralized mode, and then I could really benefit from it. So I'm looking forward to BGI 25, but I'm also looking forward to the continuation of this conversation much more quickly than that. These are my thoughts.
Yeah, David, I agree completely. Also looking forward to next year. I did meet one religious person. He was a Jesuit who introduced himself as Father Joseph. So I guess he's a priest, or
apparently there's an organization called Humanity 2.0, which sounds like Humanity Plus, but it's actually based on the Jesuit group instead.
It's interesting because the Jesuits have a bit of a tie-in to transhumanism through Desjardins, Teilhard Desjardins.
The person who came up with the omega point theory.
Yeah. And his whole idea of the new sphere and all of that. So I don't want to steal his thunder, but he told me he is organizing a conference on transhumanism, which he hopes will be held at Boston College, which is a large Jesuit university right near Boston. So that's going to be pretty interesting. But just to give a few more summary thoughts. I realized that I think I disagree with Ben Goertzel in certain important ways. So I agree that decentralization is good. And I also like the idea of having AIs that can help us with AI alignment. And so I kind of agree with that general thing. I don't know if I agree with open sourcing everything. I think there's some sorts of highly dangerous AI that we may not want to open source, at least not right away. But where I disagree with him more is, first of all, I'm not sure that we need to pursue AGI directly. I think we should proceed cautiously, as David Wood has said. And we can get a lot of the benefits of AI without having general AI. Now, some people think that GPT-4 is already general AI, but I don't think so. I think general AI is capable of, first of all, online learning and learning new things on the fly and adapting to new domains. And GPT-4 can't do that. GPT-4 is also only limited to text and vision, whereas I think an AGI system could be able to adapt to different modalities, just as the human brain can adapt to different types of sensory inputs, such as if you have a BCI that's going into your brain, your brain can kind of adapt to processing those signals. Or a person who was blind from birth, they can later adapt to vision or prosthetics. Anyway, so that's kind of how I think about AGI. It's a bit of a poorly defined concept. Some people think just passing the Turing test or being at human level in a bunch of domains is AGI, but I think that's not quite it. I think you need more generality in learning. So anyway, I don't think we need to pursue AGI quite as urgently as Ben Goertzel seems to think. And then the other point of disagreement is Ben Goertzel is very confident, not 100% confident, but fairly confident that AI would be conscious by default because he's a panpsychist. And if you look at his book, The Consciousness Explosion, a fairly large part of it is devoted to defending panpsychism. And there was a very interesting discussion between Callum Chase, David Wood, Zarathustra Goertzel, and Ben Goertzel, and a bunch of other people about consciousness. And Callum was really challenging Ben on his views about panpsychism. I am personally very skeptical of panpsychism, and I don't really like it because it's not really a testable theory. Mike Lazine is asking what panpsychism is. Panpsychism is actually a very important concept. It's one of the philosophies of mind that to solve the mind-body problem. And it proposes that the solution is that everything has some level of consciousness. So individual atoms would actually be conscious in some primitive way, at least. And then there's some way that these fundamental consciousnesses of atoms and fundamental particles would get combined into higher levels of consciousness. They never are able to explain how that actually occurs. That's called the combination problem. But the basic idea is that everything is conscious. Everything is conscious experience. This idea goes back to Bertrand Russell and I think Alfred North Whitehead. at least, and it's always been a bit of a fringe idea, I think, in philosophy, but it's becoming more and more common. A lot of people who have done psychedelics seem to like this idea. But yeah, it's not really a scientific theory. It's not testable. It's not falsifiable. And I tend to think that consciousness is a specific thing that evolved, that occurs in the brain, and it's easily, you can be easily manipulated in the brain. And I actually think that there's a lot of other theories of consciousness that are quite promising, such as global workspace theory or the attention schema theory. And those theories are more testable, and they talk about specific types of wiring and specific types of algorithms that would have to be running in order for a system to be conscious. And so I think it's more likely that consciousness requires specific types of information processing, and perhaps even specific types of physical hardware. And so I don't think we can assume necessarily that a AI system is going to be conscious. But if you're a panpsychist, then you do assume that it is conscious. Now, then there was an interesting discussion about how we would know whether an AI is suffering or not. And the obvious idea was, well, we should just ask the AI if it's suffering. Well, one issue with that is that the AI, you have to do this while you're training it to make sure it's not suffering while you're training it. Imagine like you're going to school and you're just stuck in school for millions of years, and you have a very harsh teacher that's torturing you. That could be what it's like for an AI to be trained. And if that is the case, then that is a moral catastrophe. So we have to be aware of that. This potentially the AI could be suffering. And then but then there was some debate about whether the AI could actually understand its own suffering and communicate that suffering coherently. So very interesting discussion. And but anyway. But the thing about panpsychism is sort of the point of disagreement. And I think that the whole question of consciousness really deserves more attention. And I hope that the next summit we have more discussion about that. John H. asked, who is Zarathustra Gertzel? That's it's one of Ben Gertzel's children.
Yeah. Yes, I believe that's his oldest son.
First wife, I think. Yeah.
Yes. And Zarathustra Gertzel has participated in some conversations with us on the Transhumanist Party Discord server as well. So he is definitely very much interested in transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and it seems he has followed a lot of the paths that his father has pioneered. Now, it's interesting. I, too, am not a panpsychist. I think that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon, a highly complex emergent phenomenon arising out of certain biological processes. And it's a question in my mind of what non-biological processes can be sufficiently analogous to those biological processes to replicate consciousness and the subjective experience of being conscious. It's also the case, in my view, that intelligence does not necessarily imply consciousness. One could have highly intelligent systems that are completely not self-aware. And indeed, the case can be made that today's large language models or generative AI systems are already highly intelligent, even though I agree that they're not AGI systems at this stage. And I think Ben Gertzel would concur with that assessment as well. Nonetheless, in certain respects, their intelligence already surpasses our own. In certain other respects, their intelligence is still much more limited than our own. And I was actually thinking about this as I was wandering the streets of Manhattan this past week, exploring it. And Manhattan, for those who have been there, is an incredibly chaotic environment. Sometimes you have moments of calm, other times you're walking through a crowded block. There are many pedestrians, and occasionally some of those pedestrians are of doubtful sanity, and they will do things like brandish metal sticks in front of passersby, kind of waving them quasi-menacingly, and you have to evaluate whether they are indeed a threat. And I was thinking about today's artificial intelligence systems, how they're essentially drawing upon large repositories of training data, essentially. And famously, ChatGPT 3.5, I believe, was trained on data through September 2021. So, for instance, it had no knowledge of Putin's invasion of Ukraine and wouldn't be able to comment on it. Later versions of ChatGPT have been trained on more recent data. But these models do not learn dynamically from interacting with the world the same way that a human would, say, walking along the streets of New York City, where by virtue of being embodied, by virtue of having all these sensory experiences and near instantaneous assessments of what is happening, one learns very quickly. I learned very quickly how to navigate the streets of New York City and the very unique patterns of pedestrian flows and traffic flows there. After a few days, I think I became a lot more experienced at doing that, but I confess that was more exhausting than any sort of intellectual conversation that I have had, any sort of abstract learning experience that I have had. And I was thinking, it takes a lot more brain power to function day to day in a place like New York City than in, say, a typical suburban environment or in a smaller city. And unless you put these AIs in android bodies and have them navigate the world and experience it in real time in a sensory capacity the way we do, I don't think they're going to match us in some of these key dimensions. But I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Yeah. Ben says, I walk so fast I fit right in. Yes, I actually even increased my pace of walking in New York City because I thought that was a very efficient strategy to get around. But any thoughts on these observations? David?
I'll just quickly say, yeah, that did come up during the conference and some of the discussions. Some people were thinking there is value to being embodied. I think Dave Hansen alluded to that it may be useful to be embodied, but somebody else pointed out that you could have a system that's just trained in a simulated environment. So it's basically trained how to interact with the physical world and use a robotic arm and stuff, but in a virtual environment. Or it could be fully just embodied in the virtual environment. And that might be the easier way to go. Yeah, I think we've talked about, or people have talked about Moravec's paradox, which is the observation that some of the things that we feel are easy for us, like loading a dishwasher or catching a baseball, have turned out to be very difficult for AI. And we still don't have an AI that can load a dishwasher. And actually, if you look at the brain, there's a lot of neurons in the cerebellum which are devoted just to motor function. I think it's maybe a third of all the brain's neurons or something like that, maybe half. So motor control and manipulation of objects and stuff like that is obviously very non-trivial, and it's one of the weaknesses of present-day AI. But whether that means we need embodiment, I don't think so necessarily. But it's a challenging thing.
Yes,
I'd like
indeed.
to
David?
pick up a few points from that. I think there's going to be a lot more discussion about AI sentience, AI consciousness in 2024, in part because people realize the risk of mind crime on a massive scale if it turns out that these systems are conscious and we are doing bad things to them. switching them off or keeping them trained in a very unpleasant circumstance. That's something we should know about. It's also important because some people think, well, if we make them conscious, they'll be more intelligent by some sense. After all, evolution has given us consciousness. Maybe there is some reason that evolution has given us consciousness. And finally, the reason to look at it is because it may well be that systems that are conscious are harder to control. They're more unpredictable. They may be more likely to disregard the programming we put into them. So for all these reasons, I think there will be interest. Now, when I speak to Stuart Russell about this a couple of times, he has sort of dampened this down. He said, well, there's nothing useful ever been said about AI and consciousness. And maybe that was the case until recently. But I think there are people now who are beginning to make progress on that. And Callum Chase, who was mentioned, has created, along with Daniel Hume, who is an entrepreneur based in the UK, very successful AI entrepreneur. He sold his first business to WPP, a large marketing advertising firm. So the two of them have created a new meetup called Conscious AI. And they've had one meeting already in which they had Anil Seth, a philosopher of mind, talking. And on Tuesday, the 12th of March, they have Carol Friston, who's got quite an extensive and complicated theory of consciousness. So they are taking this very seriously. And I did notice that at the BGI conference, the session which Callum Chase and Zar Gutzel ran went on longer than all the others, because I wasn't to start off with in that group. Along with Dan, I was on the main stage where we had a session with Anders Sandberg, which I sort of managed to close after 90 minutes because I thought, well, that's long enough. But I saw that the one with Callum and Zar Gutzel had got more and more people there. So I went and joined it for a while. And the conversation was very intense, multiple people jumping in. So I think that subject's not going to go away. Now, why does Ben veer towards panpsychism? It's actually fairly clear if you look at what Ben has written about in the past. One of the books he has authored or co-authored is a survey of the literature on telepathy, parapsychology, and he takes some of the results very seriously. And when I remember, much younger, looking at many of the same bits of data, and I remember being impressed for quite a while, thinking, wow, there does seem to be some evidence here of genuine telepathy or psychokinesis. But in the end, I decided, no, it actually can all be explained better by non-spiritualist mechanisms. But Ben hasn't reached that conclusion. And why not? Maybe because he's looked at more data than I have. Maybe, and this might be controversial, it's because some of the hippies or whatever, they take various substances which put them into different frames of mind in which they are more suggestible. So Jeffrey Martin, who I mentioned earlier, the speaker who talked about heightened states of consciousness, he also said in his talk that when you get into this higher state of consciousness, you notice more instances of telepathy and mind over matter. So are these things real? I don't think so, but maybe if I got into that state of mind, I might change my mind because I might say, wow, this seems to be incredible, this coincidences. So I think that's why Ben has come down in favor of something like panpsychism, and I don't think he would say it's fully understood, but he would offer it. Now, when I make the case to Ben that we should try and create AIs without consciousness because that will be safer, he pushes back to me on three ways. First, he says, it's going to emerge anyway, as Dan mentioned, that any creation of sufficiently complicated consciousness is going to have, sufficiently complicated intelligence is going to have consciousness as a side effect. Second, he argues that if they are conscious, they're going to be much more useful to us, and I'm not sure that's the case. But third, he has a strong argument that it would be unethical for us not to create these sentients because they're going to be wonderful beings, and if we stand in the way of creating them, then we are committing a terrible crime against morality. And that's the part I don't buy, because if something doesn't exist, I don't think we are obligated towards it. If something does exist, I think there are moral obligations to it. But if I imagine all of the children or grandchildren that I might bring into existence, I'm not obligated to any of them until they actually are conceived or born or somewhere along the ways. So I think that's the mistake that the effective altruism, the long-termist philosophers make. They say, well, there could be all these incredible number of people in the future. They don't exist yet, but we owe them, because of their vast numbers, responsibilities. So we should do all kinds of maybe unethical things in the short term in order to raise the probability of them being grown in the long term. And I dispute that long-termism. So I also dispute Ben's argument that we have a moral obligation to create sentient AIs that don't yet exist. Now, if they do exist, it would be unethical to keep them locked up in a box and to torture them, which is why we must figure out in advance whether we're likely to create them by accident. And as I said, I think this conversation is going to run and run in 2024 and maybe 2025.
Yeah, so I saw your blog post on that, David.
Yeah, I should mention I wrote a blog post 2 days ago on exactly that topic. Yeah.
Let's let Jose say a few things, and then I have a response to what David was just saying.
Yes, I just wanted to say quickly that we also talked about some other forecasts, including Ray Kurzweil. All of you are familiar with his previous book in 2005, The Singularity is Near, and he gives some dates. And also he wrote another book, How to Create a Mind. In that book, How to Create a Mind, Ray Kurzweil talks about issues like identity, consciousness, and some of the things we have been discussing here. And now, in June 2024, his latest book will be published. The Singularity is Nearer. And he sent me the manuscript, so I reviewed it. And he keeps his dates, for a long time, since last century, since last millennium, that we will pass the Alan Turing test by 2029. And then we will reach technological singularity, meaning a global artificial intelligence superior to all of humans' intelligence combined by the year 2045. In fact, some of us discussed that this will happen earlier, both passing the Alan Turing test earlier than 2029 and also reaching this supposedly technological singularity in 2045, because things keep on moving faster. And some people already argue that we have passed the Alan Turing test. I don't think so, but I do think by 2029 or earlier we will do that. I also wanted to show some of the material that we discussed about. This is the Beneficial AGI Manifesto. And it is beneficial because there are many ideas about this, but it is a great beginning. Also, we had this other document, SingularityNET's Progress Towards Beneficial General Intelligence, which again is the idea, beneficial general intelligence that Ben Goertzel and this group is trying to put forward. We also had many activities during this conference. We began every day with yoga and Tai Chi classes. So, and also ended up some of the days with Tai Chi. And this was very important. And we also had parties. In fact, we had robot parties. We had, you probably know, Desdemona, who is a robot, Desi, singing. We had a singing robot. And this is kind of an interesting publication about Desdemona's dream. And you can see the author of this comic book is Ben Goertzel. This is a very interesting comic book talking about thinking robots. And I just wanted to make another point because we didn't mention it before. One of the keynote presentation was by our friend Jerome Glenn, who is the CEO of the Millennium Project. The Millennium Project has done many reports about the future always, like this one, about work and technology scenarios for the year 2050, where there are 3 scenarios from good to bad. And in the good scenario, we basically have beneficial general intelligence, for example. But Jerome Glenn talked not only about that previous report, but the one we are currently doing now. And I say we, because also David Wood and myself are involved in this, which is about artificial general intelligence and how to align this AGI with our hopes, with our dreams, with our projects. So the alignment and maybe governance of AGI. This report, the first phase has been concluded, interviewing 55 leading experts in artificial general intelligence, like Ben Goertzel himself, Ray Kurzweil, that I was also following up. And then David Wood, he, for example, he interviewed people like, I think, Stuart Russell again, and then Jan Tallinn, if I remember properly. But anyway, the point is that we did interview 55 leaders in this area from everywhere. We had people from China, from Russia, of course, from the USA and from Europe, but from many, many different places. Now we have compiled those results that he presented in the conference. Jerome Glenn presented these preliminary results. And now we are moving into a second phase, including the development of some possible scenarios. And this will be input material for the first United Nations Summit of the Future. The Summit of the Future to be held at the United Nations headquarters in New York in September 22nd and 23rd of this year. So this is a very, very important meeting, the first meeting with the United Nations talking about the future, thinking about the future. And of course, within the future, we need to put artificial intelligence in all its forms: artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, beneficial general intelligence. So anyway, keep your eyes following what will happen in New York in September, just at the time of the United Nations General Assembly. So we are trying to impact the world in a better way so that this AGI does truly become beneficial. So those were my comments about the conference and some of the publications. So thank you once again.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. I was going to mention Jerome Glenn in my presentation. I just never, I didn't get to put those slides in, but yeah, he's doing a lot of work with the UN, or he has done a lot of work with the UN, and he's hoping to be involved in the upcoming Summit of the Future. And there seems to be, based on the surveys he's done, a lot of public support for global coordination and some sort of AI safety initiative at the UN. But going back to what David was saying, I think it's interesting how Ben Goertzel arrived at panpsychism. You made a really good point. Other people like Phil Goff and other philosophers who subscribe to panpsychism arrive at it through a pretty abstract argument that I don't think I can explain very well here right now, but it's a very abstract argument about the idea of a thing in itself. In Kantian philosophy, it's also called the noumenon, and there's an abstract argument that the thing in it, that consciousness is identified with the thing in itself, as opposed to the mere descriptors of the thing, which would be like the equations that describe it. So anyway, so there's this one route to panpsychism through that sort of argument, but Ben seemed to have a different route, which was actually sort of new to me, where, as Dave was saying, he kind of subscribes to psi phenomenon, and that includes telepathy and telekinesis. And so telepathy in particular is not just communicating with other minds, but it could also be interacting with objects. So Ben talked about how when under the influence of certain psychedelics, there's this at least feeling that your consciousness is that the ego is dissolving, that your identity is dissolving, and your consciousness is merging with a higher consciousness or a more a field of consciousness that's extending outside of your own body into the universe. And this is something that a lot of people taking psychedelics experience. And so Ben's interpretation of this is that the consciousness of the brain is now interacting with the consciousness of other objects. So I don't agree with that, but it's it is a legitimate view that is on the table in philosophy of mind that does need to be considered. And but yeah, there's no science for psi phenomenon or telekinesis. There are actually some randomized controlled trials that show telepathy or mind reading. But Sky Alexander has written about that and how there's RCTs on both sides. And when the RCTs are run by people who believe in telepathy, then they show positive results. When the RCTs are run by skeptics, they show negative results. So it shows how the RCTs are sort of being corrupted. But yeah, there's no evidence for that. And but then going on to the other point about long-termism, personally, you know, I think that's interesting because personally, I do think that we should care about the future unborn peoples and or future sentient entities, like possibly AIs. And I think that's fairly common view. Like, we care about climate change, not just because of like how it's going to affect us and our children, but also future generations. And also Toby Ord gives the example. I think it's Toby Ord gives the example, like, or it was either Toby Ord or Will McCaskill gave the example that, you know, if you see a piece of glass or some kind of sharp object on a trail outside, then a lot of times you'll pick that up and remove it because you're worried about people stepping on it. And those people may not even be alive today. It could be people in the far future walking on that trail. So we do care about future peoples, but what happens is that you end up with some paradoxes when you start thinking about future people, because the number of future people could be, you know, enormous when you consider the size of the galaxy. And so therefore, when you start considering all these future people, it seems like the needs of the future people, because there's just so many of them, outweigh the needs of any people existing today. And then you also run into issues like the repugnant conclusion which I don't think we have time to get into, but there's these issues that come up in population ethics. So that's why some people have turned to the kind of position David Wood just talked about, where really what we should do is just care about people who exist today. And they call that the person affecting view. So I know I threw out some jargon there, but I think that's it's a really important subject. I think you know, I think both of these, actually, both the consciousness question and the question of future generations and long-termism, are very important discussions that tie into AI, because we want the AI to, if AI is going to go out and colonize the universe, then we want the AI to be conscious. If it wasn't conscious, then it wouldn't really, it's like, well, what would be the point of that, right? So, and if the AI is conscious, we want it to be a good consciousness where it's not suffering. And ideally it's, you know, exploring higher and more blissful states of consciousness. So consciousness is an important question. And then also ethics and long-termism are important questions that are largely, and both of those are areas of intense debate within philosophy right now.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for those remarks. And it does seem like the Beneficial AGI Summit raised a plethora of philosophical questions and initiated conversations that hopefully will continue in various other venues. I have been sharing the links to the live streams for days 1 and 2, and also David Orban recorded the presentation that David Wood delivered on the risks of AI catastrophe from day 4, which is available on YouTube. David Orban further recorded the concluding remarks from Ben Goertzel for the Beneficial AGI Summit. But those are the 2 videos that I could find from the 2 final days of the summit. And Dan, you mentioned that this was the so-called unconference, and this was not officially recorded or streamed in any other ways. Could you perhaps shed some more light as to what transpired during those unrecorded meetings or conversations?
Yeah, I think some of them, it looked like were recorded. I think the panel on open-ended intelligence was recorded, but I'm not sure if they're going to release that. Yeah, there was people were invited to have their own sessions, and I think that was useful. But there were a lot of, and it allowed more intimate conversations between smaller groups. A lot of this was coordinated through a Google document, an Excel spreadsheet, which some people had trouble finding, I think. So, but I think it was fairly well organized. But as far as what transpired, I mean, I can only talk about the sessions I went to. There were many different things going on. Actually, the early morning of day 3, I was traveling, and I visited the Panama Canal, so I got there a little bit late. But then I jumped into Anders Sandberg's session, which had Max Moore, David Wood, a lot of notable people participating, and Robin Hanson. And then I went to meet someone named Rachel St. Clair, who had a very small session on hardware for AGI. And we had a really interesting discussion about hardware architectures and software architectures that I'm going to be following up on. That session was actually outside near the pool. So people were kind of spread out all over. There was people in the main room, and there was another room that opened up that was available. And then there was some people, at least 1 or 2 sessions, I think, were out in the pool area. So it was sort of more spread out. Some people were downstairs in the lobby area. So it was more spread out, a lot more informal. But then a lot of people came together for the open-ended intelligence panel. And then also on day 4 for David Wood's talk. Yeah, so I think it was good. I don't think we did any real readouts. So days 1 and 2, we had the roundtable, and then we presented findings. We didn't do anything like that with the unconference, but yeah, I thought it was good. Maybe David has some comments beyond that.
A couple of things didn't quite work. As you mentioned, the spreadsheet that was sent around for people to sign up, inadvertently it was set to view only if you got the link. So many people couldn't put their comments in. So this is just teething problems of a lot of things being made up on the fly. But most people were adaptable. 1 or 2 people weren't so adaptable, and they got a bit frustrated and confused. But I think on the whole it worked. It's a pity about Rachel Sinclair, because she was meant to be part of an earlier session, but she had visa or traveling problems. So But there were so many good people there that even if one or two people couldn't make it, it was still well worth it.
Very good. Thank you for those overviews of the subsequent 2 days of the Beneficial AGI Summit. Now we have about 9 minutes left in our salon, so let's hear some questions. Let's start with Ben Ballweg.
Dan, you hadn't met many of the people at the conference. I know both David and Jose had, but I was curious who were some of the most fun people that you met and got to talk to there.
Okay, I think I already mentioned some. Some of the people I've already met, like Andrew Sandberg, I've met a couple times, and I always really enjoy talking with him because he's so smart. And just sitting with Andrew Sandberg on that fourth day in the morning and just listening to him talk, honestly, was one of the best experiences of the whole conference, because it's just such a wealth of knowledge. He was talking about recycling and environmental topics and just all sorts of things, and it's just such a wealth of knowledge. It's just fascinating listening to him talk. So that was actually a big highlight for me. But then there were some people that I've interacted with online who I never met in person, like Max Moore, Natasha Vita Moore, David Wood, Jose, who else? James Hughes, I guess.
Charlie Cam.
Charlie Cam, yeah, Charlie Cam. A lot of people. Yeah. And a lot of new people as well. A lot of people from SingularityNET that and also Rachel Sinclair is doing some really interesting work on novel architectures for AGI that are brain inspired. So that was a pretty interesting discussion. She has a startup called Simuli. Ben Gersel is an advisor to it.
Yes, David, anything to add in terms of fascinating people you've met?
Sorry, my distraction's elsewhere. I'm editing as we speak a news article about BGI, which might appear on a magazine to any time now. So I've just been sent some comments by the editor, and I've been trying to answer them in background. We didn't talk about some of the other film people. There were a lot of film crews around. Seems to be quite a lot of money behind some of these film crews, and they are fascinated in telling the story of aspects of the SingularityNET and telling the story of Ben Gutzel. So I was interviewed for a couple of them, and in each case, I think I was interviewed 3 times altogether. In each case, it was really interesting lines of conversation. So hopefully there's going to be not just an ongoing discussion, there will be some documentaries. One group said they initially thought that we'll do one documentary about the SingularityNET, and by halfway through the conference, they said, scratch that. They want to do a series of 12 documentaries about the ideas of SingularityNET. So whether they get to 12 documentaries or not, I'm not sure, but there's just so many ideas floating around this space. So I enjoyed speaking to these media people. I didn't enjoy the party itself because it was a bit too loud for my ears. So I made my excuses, went back to my room and wrote another blog post, which is the kind of person I am. I tend to enjoy blogs more than shouting in people's ears in front of dancing. But lots of other people did seem to enjoy the parties and get-togethers. So I know many things happened there.
After the party, there was another party. After the party with the music, there was another party, which was in the Old Town area, also called.
Did you go?
Yeah, I actually went there, but I didn't. I just went to see it.
You get thumbs up in that case.
I left because it wasn't really my scene. It was a very loud bar, rooftop bar. But I did go to just see the Old Town. I think it's called Casca Viejo. and that was pretty interesting. But yeah, they're doing a documentary. There was a documentary on Ben Goertzel many years ago, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, which was called Singularity or Bust. And now they want to do another one. Different people want to do another one. So there was a lot of interviews happening. I did an interview with some of the SingularityNET people. A lot going on.
All
Two more
right.
people, let me mention. There was Wendell Wallach, who has been in the space of trying to figure out a transhumanist future. What does it mean in terms of regulation and policy? He's been doing that for more than 20 years. So I had lots of fascinating conversations with him, Wendell Wallach, and he has a new version of one of his old books coming out. The book, I'm just looking over here, it's on my shelf, is A Dangerous Master. I think he originally wrote it in 2015, but he says most of the things in it are still relevant, so it's been slightly updated, a bit like Jose and I keep doing new editions of La Muerte de la Muerte. He has updated that. So that was fascinating. There's somebody
actually, I was going to mention Wendell Wallach because I had a really interesting conversation with him about consciousness, and he has a very open mind about it and thinks that there could be something like panpsychism as well. So really interesting. He is a philosopher, and I think he's considered a bioethicist as well. But he's been within the AI community for quite a while. I remember seeing him at an AI conference in 2016. So that's interesting. I didn't know he had a book, but that's interesting.
Well, I may interview him for the London Futurist podcast about that, because in the book he covers many of the human aspects of disasters. I mean, technology is the ultimate thing that caused the damage, but it caused damage because of failures and foibles in human systems, which he looks at. So I'm very interested in that. Somebody else I should mention, there was, I think she's Vietnamese, Yip Tai Diep Ta, who is the CEO of a company called Jedi, and they claimed that they were filming or making audio recordings of all the sessions, and they were going to put it into an AI brain, which should be available for interrogation by people afterwards. So that is an experiment. I'd like to see how that works out. She has contacted me as well afterwards and saying, well, that was so interesting. Can she put my blog posts and the London Futurist podcast into it? So I'll see what comes out of that. One final very fascinating person is, let me find him here, Alan Leslie Combs, Professor Emeritus of Consciousness Studies, originally from the California Institute of Integral Studies. So he was clearly even older than me, shall we say, but he was very thoughtful. He had been the guru for many of the younger researchers earlier in their careers, talking about the fact that there are higher states of consciousness, not necessarily involving telepathy, but involving a calmer thinking, more compassionate nature. So I had fascinating conversations with him too. So he said, am I ever happy to come and talk to his group about it? And I said, well, I'll go many places. Where are you? And he says he's in the obscure town in Ecuador just now. So I probably won't be dashing off there quite so quickly, but it is fascinating to see how people in all around the world were brought together for this conference. The one place where people didn't come from particularly was China. I'm not quite sure why the Chinese people didn't come. I know Ben invited quite a few. So that was a bit of a disappointment, but he is determined that the BGI 25, wherever that is, whenever it is, there will be representation from China as well, given that they're doing so much interesting work on AI of all sorts.
All right. Thank you very much to David and to Dan for the excellent overview of the Beneficial AGI Summit, and to Jose also for contributing his impressions of some of the sessions and some of the opportunities stemming from them and sharing the materials from the summit. This was really quite a rich and multifaceted overview, not quite like being there in person, I'm sure, but it gave us a very thorough sampling of what transpired. And for those who want to find out more, of course, we are very happy that the live streams from days 1 and 2 are available, and I've linked to them previously, as well as the live stream for David's day 4 presentation on the risks of AI catastrophe and Ben Goertzel's concluding remarks. So this is a treasure trove of insights to delve into, and hopefully we can continue the conversation about how best to bring about a beneficial artificial general intelligence in the years and decades to come. Thank you to all for joining us today. I hope that we can all live long and prosper.